She's got a gun. Someone call 911. Our HOA president screamed these words while pointing at my wife getting the mail. This woman, with her 200-page rule book, thought she'd found the perfect excuse to finally get rid of us. What she didn't know about my wife was about to turn her world upside down. 3 police cars screeched up to our house. Officers jumped out with weapons drawn, and then something happened that made every neighbor's jaw drop. Comment where you're watching from, because this HOA Karen's biggest mistake became our entire city's most shocking scandal. This all started on what should have been the happiest day of our lives. Moving into our dream home, my wife Evie and I had saved for years, convinced we'd finally found our slice of paradise. But the moment we pulled up, something felt off. Every house looked identical. Same fences, same mailboxes, even the flowers were planted in perfect symmetry. It seemed as though someone had copied and pasted the entire street. I brushed it off. Maybe people here just liked things uniform. Then I saw her, Brenda Miller, standing on her immaculate lawn, arms crossed, watching us like a hawk. No wave, no smile. Just a thick binder clutched to her chest. Not a phone book, but her Bible, her weapon, and the Constitution of the HOA. We hadn't even unloaded the first box when I heard the sharp click of heels on pavement. Brenda marched up like she was heading to a country club brunch. Not greeting new neighbors, her styled blonde hair and rehearsed smile screamed, "I need to speak to your manager." "Welcome to Maple Grove Estates," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. She thrust the massive binder into my hands before I could even introduce myself. "I'm Brenda Miller, HOA president, and this is your copy of our community guidelines. I suggest you read it thoroughly before you unpack anything." The weight of the thing nearly knocked me over. It had to be at least 200 pages of rules and regulations. Evie came around from the back of the truck just then, and I watched Brenda's eyes immediately lock onto the holstered gun on my wife's hip. Now, Evie's a cop, has been for 20 years, and she always carries one off duty. It's as natural to her as wearing a watch. But the way Brenda stared at that weapon, you'd think Evie had pulled it out and was waving it around. "That scratch on your gun," Brenda said, her voice dropping the fake sweetness, "looks like it's been fired recently." The comment was so bizarre and invasive that even Eve, who's usually unflappable, raised an eyebrow. "I'm a police officer," Evie replied coolly. "Of course it has." Brenda's eyes narrowed slightly, and she made this little humming sound in her throat. "Oh, police! How interesting. I've dealt with cops before. 20 years in this neighborhood teaches you things." There was something in the way she said it that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She spent the next 30 minutes going through what she called the most important rules, which apparently included everything from the acceptable height of grass, no more than 2 inches, to the approved colors for garden hoses. Green or black only. No exceptions. When she got to the section about fence regulations, she actually pulled out a tape measure from her purse and demonstrated the proper height by measuring our existing fence. "Shh," she said, frowning at the measurement. "This might be a problem, but we'll discuss that later." As she talked, I noticed one of our other neighbors watching from his window, a middle-aged guy who caught my eye and subtly shook his head in what looked like a warning. When Brenda noticed me looking, she waved at the man with excessive enthusiasm. "Oh, that's Bob. He's one of our most compliant residents." "Aren't you, Bob?" The man quickly retreated from the window like he'd been caught doing something wrong before leaving. Brenda made sure to point out at least a dozen potential violations she'd spotted just from our moving truck. Apparently, our cardboard boxes were an eyesore. Our moving blankets were the wrong shade of blue. And don't even get me started on her opinion about the pizza delivery guy who showed up to feed our moving crew. "Fast food deliveries are strongly discouraged," she sniffed. "They lower property values." As she click-clacked back to her house, she called over her shoulder, "I'll be sending over some recommended contractors for that fence issue. We have safety standards to maintain after all." Evie and I exchanged looks. "Well, Evie said, trying to lighten the mood. At least we know who runs the neighborhood. But I could see the tension in her shoulders. In 20 years of police work, she'd dealt with murderers, thieves, and all sorts of criminals. But something about Brenda Miller had put her on edge. That night, as we were unpacking in the garage, I found an old document that must have been left by the previous owners. It was tucked behind a shelf, yellowed with age. At the top, I could make out a name, B. Miller, Police Department. I stared at it, my mind racing. Wait, B. Miller? Why did that name sound familiar? The document was dated from 20 years ago, right around the time Brenda said she'd dealt with cops before. I showed it to Evie, who frowned at the paper. That's weird, she said. Miller's not exactly an uncommon name. But still, she trailed off, lost in thought. You know what? I'm going to do some digging at work tomorrow. Something about our new neighbor doesn't sit right with me. As we went to bed that first night in our new home, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just stepped into something much bigger than a simple neighborhood dispute. Can you guess who B. Miller really is? Because what I found next made my blood run cold. Day 3, and I got the most expensive bill of my life. I was just settling in with my morning coffee, enjoying the view from our new kitchen window, when I heard the distinctive sound of Brenda's heels on our driveway again. This time, she wasn't alone. A man in a poorly fitting suit stood beside her, holding a clipboard and trying very hard to look official. "Good morning," Brenda chirped, though her smile looked more like a grimace. "This is Carl from the HOA Safety Committee. We've completed our initial inspection of your property. I hadn't even known there was an inspection scheduled." But before I could object, Carl thrust an official-looking document into my hands. The letterhead read Maple Grove Estates Safety Committee, which sounded impressive until you noticed the Gmail address at the bottom. As I scanned the document, my coffee mug nearly slipped from my hand. They were citing us for multiple safety violations, the main one being our fence, which according to them didn't meet the newly updated safety standards for properties with law enforcement residents. The bottom line made my jaw drop. Mandatory fence replacement within 30 days. Estimated cost of $50,000? $50,000? I sputtered. For a fence? Our fence is perfectly fine. Brenda's smile widened. Oh, but it's not up to our new code, you see. When we learned a police officer would be living here, we had to update our safety requirements. It's for everyone's protection. She pulled out a glossy brochure from her purse. Fortunately, we have a pre-approved contractor who specializes in these high-security installations. Secure Home Solutions. They're the only company certified to work in our neighborhood. The way she said it, with such practiced smoothness, made my skin crawl. This felt like a script she'd rehearsed before. Carl nodded enthusiastically beside her, though I noticed he kept glancing at Brenda as if seeking approval for his performance. I took the brochure, my mind already working. Something about this whole thing stank worse than week-old garbage. "And if we don't use this specific company?" I asked. Brenda's expression hardened for just a moment before the fake smile returned. "Well, that would be inadvisable. Any other contractor would need to go through our extensive approval process, which could take months. And of course, you'd be fined $500 per day for every day your fence remains non-compliant." The threat was clear. Play ball or pay even more. After they left, I found Bob watering his plants next door. He looked around nervously before whispering, "Just pay it. Trust me." The Johnsons tried to fight her last year. They ended up having to sell their house. But I wasn't the Johnsons, and I wasn't about to roll over for some suburban tyrant that afternoon. I sat down at my computer and started digging into Secure Home Solutions. The company website looked professional enough, but something bothered me about it. All the testimonials were from Maple Grove Estates residents, and they all sounded suspiciously similar. Then I found it. The business registration. The company was registered to L. Hannity. The name didn't mean anything to me at first, so I kept digging. Social media, public records, anywhere I could find information. Then, On an old social media post from 5 years ago, I found a wedding announcement. Brenda Hannity marries Donald Miller. My heart started racing. Hannity. L. Hannity. That was Brenda's maiden name. I dug deeper, cross-referencing business records, and there it was in black and white. Secure Home Solutions was owned by Laura Hannity, and the address listed was a property owned by Brenda Miller. She was running the whole scam through what appeared to be a shell company under her maiden name. I showed Evie everything I'd found when she got home from work. She studied the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. "This is fraud," she said quietly. "She's using the HOA to force people to hire her own company at inflated prices." I expected her to immediately jump into action, to use her position to shut this down. Instead, she sat back and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "You want to fight back?" she asked. "Fine. But if we do this, we do it my way." There was something in her voice that made me realize my wife had a plan. "What do you mean, your way?" I asked. She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who just decided to go to war. "I mean, we're going to document everything. Every interaction, every threat, every falsified document. We're going to build a case so airtight that when it finally breaks, she won't know what hit her." She paused, then added, "But first, we play along. We make her think she's won." I stared at my wife, seeing a side of her I'd rarely glimpsed. This wasn't just about offense anymore. This was about justice. "There's something else," Evie said, pulling out her phone. "I did that digging I mentioned. 20 years ago, there was a B. Miller who worked with the police department, a civilian assistant who was fired for tampering with evidence. Guess what her first name was?" My mouth went dry. "Brenda." Evie nodded. "Our HOA president has a history, and I have a feeling we've only scratched the surface." She looked at me with that strange expression again, part determination, part something else I couldn't quite identify. What was Evie planning? Trust me, even I didn't see this coming. Day 5. She found out I was recording through the sound of her own laugh in my file. It started innocently enough. I'd been using my phone to record our interactions with Brenda. Just voice memos I could review later for our documentation. What I didn't realize was that during one recording, I'd accidentally captured Brenda's distinctive cackle in the background when she was talking to another neighbor about dealing with the new resident. That laugh would come back to haunt me in ways I never expected. The morning started with Brenda posting in what I discovered was a neighborhood social media group. Bob had quietly added me the night before, whispering over the fence that I might want to see what goes on in there. The post was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive warfare. "Concerns about new neighbors," the title read, followed by a wall of text about how she'd tried to be welcoming but was met with hostility and suspicious behavior. But that was just the warm-up around noon. I was working from home when my phone started buzzing non-stop. Friends, family, even former colleagues were messaging me. "Dude, is this your neighbor?" One text read with a link attached. I clicked it and felt my stomach drop. Brenda was live streaming, and she was good at it. She'd positioned herself perfectly with her house in the background, looking every bit the concerned suburban mom. "I didn't want to have to do this publicly," she said to the camera, her voice trembling with fake emotion, "but I'm genuinely scared. My new neighbor has been recording me secretly. I found out because I heard my own voice on a recording he was playing, and his wife, she's a police officer who carries a gun everywhere. I feel like I'm being intimidated in my own neighborhood." The comments were flying fast and supportive. "Call the cops. That's harassment. Stay safe, Brenda." Within minutes, the stream had hundreds of viewers. Then thousands. She was careful with her words, never quite lying, but painting a picture that made us look like the aggressors. "I simply asked them to follow the same rules everyone else follows," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "Is that so wrong? And now I find out I'm being secretly recorded. What's next? Are they going to use her position to threaten me?" The genius of it was how she mixed truth with insinuation. Yes, I had recorded her, but not secretly. I was standing right there with my phone out. Yes, Evie carried a gun, but she was a cop. But context doesn't matter when you're performing for an audience primed to take your side. I watched the view counter climb. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 in just 2 hours. The comments had turned into a mob. People were finding our names, our social media profiles, even our workplace. Police corruption. They screamed, "Abuse of power!" Bob appeared at my back door, looking terrified. Last year, the Johnsons, this is what she did to them. The online mob got so bad they had to sell their house, he whispered. She's got this down to a science. She'll keep escalating until you break. But Bob didn't know my wife. While I was panicking about the live stream, Evie was calmly making phone calls. "Don't worry about it," she said when I showed her the stream. "Let her dig her own grave." That evening, Evie's phone rang. It was her supervisor. There had been complaints, dozens of them, about a police officer harassing a civilian. They'd have to investigate. The conversation was short and professional, but I could see the impact on Evie's face when she hung up. "They might suspend me pending investigation," she said quietly. "Brenda is not just some random Karen. She knows exactly what buttons to push." I felt rage building in my chest. This woman was trying to destroy our lives over a fence dispute that was really just a cover for her scam. But then I noticed something on my laptop screen. In my panic, I'd left Brenda's live stream open, and she was still going, reading comments and responding to her supporters. That's when she made her mistake. Someone asked about the fence issue, and Brenda, high on the attention, started bragging, "Oh, I've been protecting this neighborhood for 20 years. I know how to handle people who think they're above the rules. I've dealt with cops before who thought their badges made them special. There was this one case," she caught herself, "but not before I'd screen recorded the whole thing. Did you see that?" I asked Evie, rewinding the stream. She almost said something about a case. And look at her face when she realizes she's said too much. Evie leaned in. Studying the screen, a slow smile spread across her face. "Oh my God," she said. "Mark, I think Brenda just made the biggest mistake of her life." She grabbed her laptop and started typing furiously. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Research," she said, her fingers flying over the keyboard. 20 years ago, there was a case that went sideways. A civilian assistant was accused of tampering with evidence, but the investigation was shut down. The assistant's name was redacted in most documents, but, she turned the screen toward me, not all of them. What did she post online that sealed her fate? The answer involves a gun, a badge, and perfect timing. Day 7, 3:47 p.m. The moment Brenda Miller's life changed forever. I was inside working when I heard Evie's car pull into the driveway. She'd been at the station all morning dealing with the fallout from Brenda's social media campaign. The investigation into her conduct was moving forward, and while her colleagues were supportive, bureaucracy was bureaucracy. She looked tired as she got out of the car, still in her civilian clothes, but with her service weapon holstered on her hip as always. What happened next seemed almost choreographed in its precision. Evie bent down to retrieve our mail from the ground where the postal worker had dropped it. Apparently, even our mailbox was now under HOA review. As she leaned forward, her jacket shifted, revealing the holstered gun. At that exact moment, Brenda emerged from her house with her phone already in her hand, recording. "Oh my God!" Brenda shrieked, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "She's threatening me with a weapon! She's brandishing a gun at me!" Evie straightened up slowly, mail in hand, looking confused. "What are you talking about?" But Brenda was already dialing, her fingers shaking with what looked like fear, but I knew was excitement. 911? Yes. This is an emergency. My neighbor is threatening me with a gun. She's wearing it right out in the open, pointing it at me. I'm terrified for my life. The theatrics were Oscar-worthy. She was positioning herself so her phone camera could capture Evie while making it look like she was cowering in fear. "Please hurry. She's a police officer, but she's gone rogue. She's been harassing me for days, and now she's escalating to weapons. I ran outside just as Evie was trying to approach Brenda, hands raised peacefully. Brenda, I'm not threatening anyone. This is my legal. But Brenda screamed and stumbled backward. Stay away from me! Someone help! She's coming at me! To anyone watching her recording, it would look like Evie was advancing threateningly, while Brenda retreated in terror. The sirens came fast. 3 patrol cars screamed around the corner and screeched to a halt in front of our house. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Drop the weapon! Hands where we can see them! Drop the weapon now! The lead officer was young, probably a rookie, his hand shaking slightly as he kept his gun trained on Eve. She froze, hands slowly rising, her face a mask of calm, even as multiple weapons pointed at her. I'm a police officer, Evie said evenly. My badge is in my back pocket. I'm going to move very slowly to show you. The rookie officer screamed louder. Don't move! Drop the weapon first! The tension was electric. Neighbors had come out of their houses, some filming with their phones. Brenda had positioned herself perfectly to capture everything while maintaining her victim act. Officers! Thank God, she wailed. She's been terrorizing me. That's when Officer Dave Brennan arrived. He was an older cop, a veteran who'd been on the force for 25 years. He took one look at the scene and immediately recognized something the younger officers had missed. Everyone stand down, he barked, pushing past the rookie. What the hell are you doing? He approached Eve carefully, but without the panic of the others. Ma'am, I need to see that badge. Slowly, Evie carefully reached for her badge and held it out. Dave took one look at it, and his face went white. Oh, shit, he muttered, then louder. Oh, stand down, everyone! Stand down now! This is Chief Reed, the chief of police. The transformation was instant. Weapons lowered. Faces went from aggressive to horrified. The rookie who'd been screaming looked like he might faint. Chief Reed, he stammered. But we got a call. Dave turned to Brenda with a look that could have melted steel. Ma'am, did you call 911 to report that the chief of police was threatening you? The chief who just started last month? Our new boss? The cameras were still rolling, dozens of them, capturing every second. Brenda's face went through a series of expressions. Shock, confusion, disbelief, and then something else. Her eyes narrowed. And I saw the exact moment she decided to double down. Her shocked expression melted into something calculated, and then, unbelievably, she smiled. Not a nice smile, but the smile of someone who just thought of a new angle. So you're the new boss, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. How perfect using your position to intimidate civilians. Officers, you all saw how she approached me. This is exactly the kind of abuse of power I've been documenting. She turned to the gathered crowd, playing to the cameras. You all saw that, right? Your new police chief just threatened me, and now she's using her position to avoid consequences. Is this the kind of law enforcement we want in our community? The crowd murmured uncertainly. Some people lowered their phones, but others kept recording. Sensing the drama wasn't over, Dave stepped forward. Ma'am, making a false 911 call is a crime. You reported someone brandishing a weapon when Chief Reed was simply retrieving her mail while legally carrying. But Brenda was ready for that. 2, I felt threatened. She's been harassing me for days, and when I saw that gun, I feared for my life. Are you saying citizens can't call for help when they feel unsafe? She was good. I had to give her that. Even caught red-handed making a false report. She was spinning it into another attack. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed Evie would react like her other victims, with anger, defensiveness, maybe even abuse her power to retaliate. Instead, Evie did something that clearly wasn't in Brenda's playbook. She smiled. Officer Brennan, Evie said calmly, please take Mrs. Miller's statement. Make sure to document everything, her call, her claims, and all witness statements. I want everything done completely by the book. She turned to the crowd. Anyone who has video of this incident, Please share it with the officers. We want complete transparency." Then she looked directly at Brenda. "Mrs. Miller, I understand you feel threatened. That's why we're going to document everything thoroughly. Every interaction, every claim, every piece of evidence. We want to make sure the truth is absolutely clear." Brenda's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't going according to plan. As the officers began taking statements and collecting video evidence, Brenda pulled out her ace card. She turned to her own camera, which had been recording the entire time. "You all saw that, right?" she said to her online audience. "Your new police chief just threatened me, and now she's using her badge to cover it up. Well, I know exactly what to do about it. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. What was her plan? Let me tell you, it almost worked. Day 8. For the first time in 20 years as a cop," my wife cried. The suspension came down that morning, delivered by email with all the cold efficiency of bureaucracy. "Pending investigation into conduct unbecoming an officer," it read. 7 days of forced leave while they reviewed the incident and the hundreds of complaints Brenda's followers had filed. Evie sat at our kitchen table staring at the email on her phone, and I watched something crack in her usually unshakable composure. She didn't sob or wail, but tears rolled silently down her cheeks as she read the words that put her career in jeopardy. 20 years, she whispered. 20 years of perfect service, and some suburban con artist might end it all. I'd never seen her like this. She'd been shot at, threatened by drug dealers, faced down armed criminals without flinching. But this attack on her integrity, her reputation, had found a weakness in her armor. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Through the peephole, I saw 3 of our neighbors standing nervously on the porch. I recognized them from the crowd yesterday. They'd been filming everything. "We wanted to show you something," the woman in front said when I opened the door. She held out her phone. "We've been talking, and some of us have been keeping records of our own." What they showed me made my blood boil. Videos dating back years of Brenda pulling the same stunts with other neighbors, documentation of mysterious fines, forced contractor usage, and a clear pattern of intimidation. "The Johnsons weren't the first," one man said. "My brother lived here 5 years ago. Brenda destroyed him financially with made-up violations until he had to sell. That's when I started recording everything." They'd created their own database, hidden from Brenda's knowledge, documenting her reign of terror. But it was the last video that caught my attention. It was from a community meeting 3 years ago, where Brenda was discussing security upgrades. In the video, she mentioned her experience with law enforcement procedures and specifically referenced that mess 20 years ago with the Miller case. The Miller case. There it was again. "Do any of you know what she meant by that?" I asked. The neighbors exchanged glances. "There were rumors," the woman said carefully. "Something about evidence in a big case going missing. They never proved who was responsible. But shortly after, Brenda's husband, Donald, suddenly had enough money to buy 3 rental properties. After they left, I found Evie in our bedroom, still in her pajamas at 2 house in the afternoon. The forced inactivity was killing her." "I found more connections to that old case," I said, showing her what the neighbors had shared. "And look at this. 3 years ago. She specifically mentioned it in a meeting." Evie studied the videos with the focus of a detective working a case. "I need to see those old files," she muttered. "But I can't access them while I'm suspended." That's when she made a decision that surprised me. "We're going to confront her face to face. No cameras, no witnesses, just us and her." An hour later, we stood at Brenda's door. She answered with her usual fake smile, but it faltered when she saw Evie's expression. "Chief Reed, or should I say former Chief Reed," she said. "I heard about your suspension. Such a shame when power goes to someone's head." Evie stepped forward, and for the first time, I saw Brenda take an involuntary step back. "You know who I am," Evie said, her voice low and controlled. "And I know who you are, Brenda Hannity. Assistant to Detective Donald Miller, case number 1847. The color drained from Brenda's face. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice shook. 20 years ago, an innocent man went to prison because evidence mysteriously disappeared," Evie continued. "Evidence that would have proved his innocence. The assistant who handled that evidence was never formally charged, but she was fired. Funny how her boyfriend suddenly had money to invest in real estate right after." Brenda's hand gripped the door frame. "You can't prove anything. That case is closed, is it?" Evie asked. "Because I have a feeling if someone started digging, they might find connections between that case and certain city officials who've been protecting you all these years. Officials who might have had their own reasons for wanting that evidence to disappear." For a moment, Brenda's mask slipped completely. The suburban housewife facade cracked, revealing something harder and more dangerous underneath. "You have no idea what you're messing with," she hissed. "That case is buried for a reason. Important people made sure of that. You think your little badge makes you untouchable? I've destroyed cops before." Then she caught herself, realized what she just admitted. The mask slammed back into place. "I mean, I've seen cops lose their jobs before when they overreach. When they threaten innocent civilians." She smiled coldly. "Prove it, Chief." "Oh, wait, you can't. You're suspended. And by the time this investigation is done, you'll be lucky if you can get a job as a mall security guard." She slammed the door in our faces. Back home, I was furious, but Evie was energized. "She just confirmed everything," she said. Pacing our living room, she practically confessed. And she mentioned important people. Plural. This is bigger than just her and some old evidence tampering. I pulled out the document I'd found on our first day. The one labeled B, Miller, Police Department. Looking at it more carefully now, I noticed something. There was another name partially visible at the bottom, mostly faded but still readable. "Thompson," I read aloud. "Why does that name sound familiar?" Evie grabbed the paper, staring at it intently. "Thompson? Oh my God. Mark, that's the mayor. Mayor Thompson was a prosecutor 20 years ago. He would have been involved in that case." I stared at the paper, hands shaking. This changes everything. "But there's one more name on here, barely visible beneath a coffee stain. And when you see who it is, who else was involved in the cover-up? Here's a hint. They're about to speak at tomorrow's press conference. Day 10, 10 a.m. The press conference that would destroy an entire city's leadership. City Hall was packed with reporters, cameras, and concerned citizens. What had started as a neighborhood dispute had exploded into a citywide controversy. And Mayor Thompson had called this press conference to address the concerns about police conduct. I sat in the back row, my phone ready to record everything. Evie was at home, banned from attending while under suspension. But we had a plan. The night before, I'd made a call to Diana Chen, an investigative reporter I'd gone to college with. I'd shared everything we'd discovered, and she'd spent the night digging into records I couldn't access. "Trust me," she'd said. "If half of what you're telling me is true, tomorrow's press conference is going to be explosive." Now, watching Mayor Thompson take the podium, I could see the sweat on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his politician's smile not quite reaching his eyes, "we're here to address the recent incident involving our new police chief and a concerned citizen." He launched into a carefully prepared speech about the importance of accountability and the need for law enforcement to be held to the highest standards. It was boilerplate political speak, designed to say nothing while sounding important. Then Brenda took the microphone. She dressed for the occasion. A conservative blue dress, pearl necklace, looking every inch the concerned suburban mother. The transformation from HOA tyrant to victim was complete. "Thank you, Mayor Thompson," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "I never wanted this to become so public. But when those we trust to protect us become the threat, what choice do we have?" She launched into her tale of persecution, carefully edited to paint herself as a simple homeowner, trying to maintain community standards while being terrorized by a gun-wielding police chief. The crowd was eating it up. Some people nodded along, others took notes. The cameras captured every word. "Chief Reed has abused her power from day one," Brenda continued. "She's used her position to threaten and intimidate anyone who dares to question her. I have video evidence of her advancing on me aggressively. I have witnesses who saw her brandish her weapon, and when I called for help, like any citizen has the right to do, she used her influence to turn the responding officers against me. She was building to her crescendo. I demand Chief Reed's immediate termination. We cannot have someone who thinks their badge puts them above the law leading our police force." The crowd erupted in mixed reactions. Some applause, some murmurs of agreement, others looking skeptical. Mayor Thompson returned to the microphone. "Mrs. Miller's concerns are being taken very seriously. The investigation into Chief Reed's conduct is ongoing, and I assure you, if any wrongdoing is found—" That's when Diana stood up. She was in the third row, press credentials visible, voice carrying clearly through the room. "Mr. Mayor, Diana Chen, investigative reporter, I have a question for both you and Mrs. Miller." The mayor's smile tightened. "Of course. Though we should stay focused on the current situation." Diana wasn't deterred. "Oh, this is very much about the current situation. Mrs. Miller, can you explain your connection to evidence tampering in case number 1847 from 20 years ago?" The room went silent. Brenda's face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, then attempted recovery. "I don't know what you're talking about." "This is clearly an attempt to deflect," Diana cut her off. "I have documents showing you were the civilian assistant who last handled critical evidence in the Marcus Washington case. Evidence that mysteriously disappeared, leading to an innocent man spending 15 years in prison. Mr. Mayor, as the prosecutor on that case, care to comment on how evidence in your custody vanished?" The silence was deafening. Every camera in the room swung between Brenda, the mayor, and Diana. Thompson's face had gone from red to white. That case was thoroughly investigated. No wrongdoing was found, really." Diana pulled out a folder. "Because I have a sworn affidavit from former Detective Raymond Burke, who says he was pressured to drop his investigation into the missing evidence. He names both you and Mrs. Miller. Then Brenda Hannity, as persons of interest who were never properly investigated." The room exploded. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and through it all, Brenda stood frozen at the podium. "This is ridiculous," she finally managed. "This is a witch hunt orchestrated by Chief Reed to distract from her abuse of power." But Diana wasn't done. "Mrs. Miller, can you explain why your husband, Donald, received a payment of $200,000 from a shell company linked to Mayor Thompson just weeks after the evidence disappeared?" That's when Brenda cracked. I never. That case was closed. It has nothing to do with this." Her carefully constructed victim persona was crumbling. The suburban housewife mask was slipping, revealing the cornered criminal underneath. Mayor Thompson tried to regain control. "This press conference is about current events." "Not baseless accusations about—" Diana smiled. "Oh, but it is about current events. You see, Marcus Washington was exonerated last month based on new DNA evidence. He's filing a civil suit against the city, and his lawyers are very interested in who was responsible for his wrongful conviction." The mayor's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Brenda gripped the podium with white knuckles. "You can't prove anything," Brenda said, her voice barely above a whisper, but picked up by the microphones. "That evidence is gone. It's been 20 years. Actually," Diana said, pulling out her phone, "Marcus Washington's lawyer would like to say something." She held up the phone to her microphone. A deep voice filled the room. "This is Attorney Michael Brooks, representing Marcus Washington. We've just filed charges against Brenda Miller, Mayor Thompson, and 3 other city officials for conspiracy to obstruct justice. We have evidence that the destruction of evidence was part of a larger pattern of corruption involving planted evidence, bribery, and false convictions. Mrs. Miller, We have your fingerprints on documents you claimed never to have handled. The room was in chaos. Reporters were shouting questions, people were filming with their phones, and Mayor Thompson was trying to leave the podium. But Evie's voice cut through the noise. She'd entered through a side door in full uniform, despite her suspension, looking every inch the chief of police she was. "Before anyone leaves this room," she said, her voice carrying the authority of 20 years in law enforcement, "there's something else you all need to know about your mayor." She looked directly at Thompson, who had stopped mid-escape. "The FBI has been investigating city corruption for the past year, Mayor Thompson. They have some questions about those shell companies and about the 3 other innocent people who went to prison during your time as prosecutor." What happened next made headlines for weeks. Ready to see a Karen's empire crumble in real time? Same day, 2 p.m. The last thing Brenda said before being handcuffed made the entire neighborhood gasp. The press conference had devolved into complete chaos. FBI agents had entered City Hall, Mayor Thompson was being escorted out in handcuffs, and reporters were scrambling to cover what was rapidly becoming the biggest corruption scandal in the city's history. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers seeking the sun. Photographers pushed against the police barriers, trying to get the perfect shot of the mayor being led away. The crowd had grown from the few dozen who'd initially attended to hundreds as word spread through social media. But Brenda, even as her world crumbled around her, was still fighting. She'd pulled out her phone and started live streaming again, trying to control the narrative one last time. Her hands were shaking as she held the phone, but her voice was steady with the desperation of someone who'd lost everything but couldn't admit it. "You're seeing a coup!" she screamed into her phone, her carefully styled hair now disheveled, her makeup running. "Chief Reed is staging a takeover. This is what happens when you give people too much power. She's using her badge to silence anyone who dares to question her." The phone shook as she panned across the chaotic scene, trying to paint herself as the victim of an elaborate conspiracy. But her usual audience wasn't buying it anymore. The comment section, which I could see on a reporter's laptop who was monitoring the stream, had turned against her completely. Where once there had been hearts and supportive messages, now there was nothing but anger and disgust. "You stole evidence. Innocent people went to jail. You're a criminal. 20 years of lies." The very platform she'd weaponized against us had turned on her. Some commenters were sharing screenshots from news articles already being published about the scandal. Others were posting old photos they'd found of Brenda from 20 years ago, identifying her in police department photos from the time. One commenter wrote, "My uncle was Marcus Washington. He lost 20 years of his life because of you." The comment got thousands of likes within seconds. Brenda tried to respond to some comments, but her words were becoming increasingly frantic. "You don't understand. I was protecting our community. I was maintaining standards, property values, safety." But each protest only seemed to dig her deeper. The viewer count was climbing again. But now people were watching to see her downfall, not to support her. Officer Dave Brennan approached her with another officer, handcuffs ready. They moved carefully through the crowd, which parted to let them through. Everyone had their phones out, recording history in the making. "Brenda Miller, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to commit fraud," Dave said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush that had fallen over the crowd. "More charges will come later, but these will do for now." That's when she said it. The words that would become infamous in our neighborhood. The words that would be turned into memes and shared thousands of times. "I'm the HOA president. You can't do this. I run this neighborhood." She was still screaming it as they cuffed her, still broadcasting live to thousands of viewers, watching her complete meltdown. "I protect this neighborhood. I kept property values up. I maintain standards. Without me, this place will fall apart." Her voice cracked on the last word, the facade finally breaking completely. The woman who'd terrorized a neighborhood for 2 decades was being arrested while live streaming her own downfall. The irony was perfect. That's when Bob, Quiet Bob, who'd warned me on day one, stood up in the crowd. I hadn't even noticed him arrive. But there he was, pushing through the onlookers. His voice shook, but it carried in the silence that followed Brenda's outburst. "No, you were the president." "Were, past tense, and you didn't protect us. You extorted us." The crowd turned to look at him, something in their faces. Recognition, support, solidarity gave him courage. His voice grew stronger as he continued. "She made the Johnsons sell their house. She forced the Petersons into bankruptcy. She stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from us through her fake company. We were all too scared to speak up, but not anymore." It was like a dam breaking. Other neighbors began speaking up, sharing their stories. Margaret Tompkins, who I'd seen supporting Brenda online just days ago, stepped forward. She threatened to fine me into bankruptcy if I didn't support her publicly. I never wanted to write those comments. An elderly man I recognized but hadn't met spoke next. "She made me replace my roof 3 times in 5 years. Each time with her approved contractor, it cost me my retirement savings." One by one, the victims found their voices. Within hours, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The community center was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the aisles and spilling out into the parking lot. Someone had set up speakers so everyone could hear. The meeting was technically illegal. Brenda, as president, was supposed to call all meetings, but she was a bit busy being processed at the county jail. Bob had been chosen as temporary leader, more by default than design, and he stood at the podium where Brenda had held court for so many years, looking uncomfortable but determined. "First order of business," he said, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat and started again. "Motion to remove Brenda Miller as HOA president. Effective immediately." The vote was unanimous. 500 hands raised in unison. 500 voices saying, "Aye." The sound was deafening. "Second order of business," Bob continued, growing more confident. "Motion to dissolve all HOA regulations enacted in the past 10 years. This vote was almost unanimous, with only 2 dissenting votes from Brenda's last remaining allies. Carl, who'd helped with the fence scam, and another woman who'd been part of Brenda's inner circle. They were glared into silence by their neighbors. The celebration that followed was unlike anything I'd ever seen. 20 years of pent-up frustration and fear transformed into joy. People hugged strangers, tears streaming down faces. The weight of Brenda's tyranny finally lifting. Someone brought out the physical copy of the HOA rulebook, all 200 pages of Brenda's tyrannical regulations. The thing was stored in a glass case in the community center, like some kind of twisted constitution, in a scene that felt like something from a movie. They built a small bonfire in the community center's fire pit. It was probably against a dozen regulations, but no one cared anymore, Bob. The man who'd been too scared to even make eye contact on my first day held the book high above his head. 20 years of hell, he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. 20 years of fear. No more. He threw the first match, and the book caught fire immediately. The crowd cheered as the pages burned, each regulation turning to ash, each rule disappearing in smoke. People threw in their copies of violation notices, fine letters, and threatening communications from Brenda. It became a cleansing ritual, a community exorcism of 2 decades of oppression. 3 months later, our neighborhood is unrecognizable in the best possible way. Without Brenda's iron fist, it's become what it should have been all along. A community. People paint their doors whatever color they want. Bob chose a brilliant purple that would have given Brenda an aneurysm. Gardens bloom with personality instead of conformity. The Yangs put up a traditional Chinese garden that's become the neighborhood's favorite spot for photos. The mandatory fence replacement was revealed to be part of a larger scam that had netted Brenda over $2 million over the years. As for the major players, Brenda Miller is serving a 15-year sentence for her role in the evidence tampering case, plus additional time for fraud and extortion. She tried to run her cell block like an HOA until the other inmates shut that down hard. Mayor Thompson got 20 years and lost his pension. 3 other city officials went down with them. The investigation revealed a web of corruption that had infected the city government for 2 decades. Marcus Washington, the man wrongly imprisoned, received a settlement of $30 million. He used part of it to establish a foundation for others wrongly convicted. He sent a thank you card to our house with just 4 words: "Justice tastes so sweet." Chief Evie Reed was not only reinstated, but received a commendation for helping expose the corruption. She implemented new policies to prevent anything like this from happening again, including regular audits of evidence handling and civilian oversight committees. The City Council passed Brenda's Law, which limits HOA power and requires financial transparency. And me, I'm writing this from my home office, looking out at our original fence, the one that started it all. Sometimes new neighbors ask about the history of our HOA, and I tell them this story. They usually think I'm exaggerating until Bob shows them the news articles. The final scene that sticks with me happened just last week. A new family moved in where Brenda used to live. They seemed nervous, probably having heard the stories. The house had been on the market for months. No one wanted to live in the Karen house. I walked over with a plate of cookies, store-bought chocolate chip, which would have been a violation under Brenda's rules. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said. "Fair warning, we used to have a pretty intense HOA president." The man laughed nervously. "We heard something about the police," I smiled, remembering everything we'd been through. "Yeah." Someone asked what I learned from the whole thing. Simple. Never call the cops on the actual chief of police. But more importantly, never let anyone turn your community into their personal kingdom. A community should be about neighbors helping neighbors, not one person ruling through fear. As I walked back home, I saw Evie's patrol car in the driveway. She still carries her gun, still serves and protects. But now she does it for a community that stood up for her when she needed it most. The fence that was supposed to cost $50,000 still stands, a monument to standing up to bullies. Funny how things work out. Sometimes the worst neighbors bring out the best in a community. Think this is wild? The real Brenda tried to sue us from prison. Want to hear what happened in court? Comment part 2 if you're ready for round 2 of this insane saga. Because, believe it or not, it gets even crazier. She actually tried to run her prison like an HOA until her cellmate, a woman named Big Martha, who was in for armed robbery, explained the real pecking order, but that's a story for another day. What did we learn today? Probably nothing, but it was fun, wasn't it? Show some love with a like and don't forget to subscribe. Hit hardy 360 toner but för